Thank you and welcome to this discussion of youth and politics. This program is brought to you by the Youth Media Department of Minneapolis Television Network. I'm your host, Nate Danforth. This will be an exchange of ideas on the topic of our day. We aim to educate each other on the values, issues, and philosophies of current political discourse. Our program will be divided into 4 sections. The first section, we will be discussing voting. The second section is going to be about current political situation. The third section is about the role of government and the role of teens in U.S. democracy. I personally would like to see that one. And our last segment should be interesting, just a little Q&A with the audience. I hope it will be good. But first, we'd like you to meet our panel. So if our panel would just introduce themselves briefly, how they got into politics.
Thanks, Nate. My name's Robert Lilligren. I am the Vice President of the Minneapolis City Council. I represent the 6th Ward, which is the area just south of downtown, the neighborhoods of Stevens Square, Whittier, Phillips West, where I live, and Ventura Village. I am the first American Indian tribal member to ever be elected within the city of Minneapolis and only the second out gay man to serve on the Minneapolis City Council. I got involved in politics in kind of a sideways way. I started voting right away when I was 18. I think I voted in every election that I could, and that was how my family engaged in politics as well. But I didn't get actively involved in politics until I was almost 40 years old. And I was a crazy neighborhood activist. I was serving on 8 different community boards, councils, commissions, and from that perspective, I was able to see some of the decisions that were coming down the line that would really impact the Phillips community where I live, and I wasn't fully confident in the quality of the decisions that were going to be made by the people that were in office. I wasn't confident that they had the community's best interests at heart, and so I decided to step forward back in 2001, run to make points about these issues. I won that election, and I have been reelected twice since then.
My name is Amy O'Connell. I am the president of the National Youth Rights Association Twin Cities chapter, youthrights.org. And I got involved in politics. Well, actually, I've kind of always been interested in politics ever since I was little in the 2008 election, but I only really got into it after I got involved in the youth rights movement and became a major youth rights activist. So, yeah.
My name is Maxwell Hall, and I'm the chapter president of the Washington County chapter of here in Minnesota. I've worked with several nonprofit organizations like the Human Rights Campaign and Environment Minnesota. I just became involved in the youth rights movement, particularly because I can't vote in this election by 2 days. So that's a reason why I came in a member of the National Youth Rights Association.
I'm Joe Gantenbein. I'm a senior at South High School, and I'm enrolled in the Voices program, which collaborates with MTN. I got first involved in politics about a year ago after listening to Ron Paul give a lot of speeches, and I became a major fan pretty quickly, and so I was actually involved, and I'll be able to vote. I'm 18, so I went to the primaries in February, and I caucused for Ron Paul. And I got elected a delegate to the Republican Party to Senate District 60, and then from there I was elected an alternate to Congressional District 5. And since then I've just really liked it. I've helped Chris Fields do a little bit of campaigning because he's a liberty-minded candidate of the Republican Party, and just being involved with those kind of making your impact and your voice heard. That's all due to Ron Paul.
My name is Carrie Dietzig. I'm the state senator from Senate District 60. I represent Northeast Minneapolis, Southeast Minneapolis, Cedar Riverside, and part of Seward. I was first elected this past January in a special election, so this is my first time holding elected office. My family was very involved in politics, and my parents would go out lit dropping and door knocking, and so at an early age we were dragged along with them. I had a dog bite by at least, I think it was 6th grade, where a dog came, around the house and bit me right in the back because I turned around and went running. So I learned early to rattle the fences when you're going out, knocking on people's doors, and so that's one of my earliest memories of campaigning.
All right, perfect. Well, let's get into our first section. Just a couple questions to get a little discussion going here. Voting is essential to having your voice heard in our political discourse, but there is actually a statistic that only 23% of young people 18 through 24 voted in the 2010 midterm election. Now, in your opinions, what can we do to increase the number of young people voting? I mean, the youth has to be heard, right? It's important. And would changing these laws, such as voting age, do you think that would affect the statistics a little? And what role do you think the voter ID amendment does to play a part in limiting the voice of young people?
I think the voter ID amendment could really have a negative impact on the, especially students as they get to college age, because depending on how they set it up, if you're required to have a government-issued ID, and if it's required that that government-issued ID show where you live now, most college students don't change their driver's license, or they don't have an ID that shows where they live now. Right now, you can use your student ID if you go to most colleges, and that could change. And so I think it will have a big negative impact on students voting. And I think, like you said, there's only 23% of them, 24% of them voted in 2010. I think this could cut that down, and I think we want more people involved. So that's why I'm not in favor of that amendment.
I think of the voter ID amendment as a voter suppression amendment. I think that's what it's designed to do. And I represent a very core city community. There isn't a majority race, a majority culture. It's very diverse. And with the groups that are most affected by this amendment, you can just tick off my constituents. It's seniors, it's renters, it's people of color, it's students, which goes to the youth question. And I think it's a huge concern. And in the area I represent, something like 90% of the housing is rental. About 10% of the population turns over almost every month. And so people may or may not have a current ID. People are going to kind of get caught into this situation where they can't produce a current ID. So I think it's designed to keep people in those categories, and including young people and students, as the senator says, from voting.
Yeah, I agree. If you look at it, the voter ID has been introduced at the same time all over the country, and it was brought here out of state, and it's definitely the goal of it is to limit the voter suppression, and it also complicates the voting process beyond what needs to really be happening. I mean, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. And also, one thing a lot of people don't talk about is the extra cost it's going to put on. It's millions and millions of dollars every election, and we're in a deficit right now. We don't have that money to be spending on unnecessary amendments.
Yeah, and the voter ID, it only prevents this one type of voter fraud that is the type that doesn't happen. It doesn't prevent us from tampering with machines and stuff. The fines on frauding one vote is way up there to such an extent that no one would ever try to do it. So
yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think it was in the 2008 election, there were actually 0 reports of fraud. I believe that's the election of the senatorial election. So really the voter ID is just going to suppress groups like the poor and the elderly, students particularly as well. Voting is a right, so you shouldn't be limiting the right to be able to voice your opinion.
Just to play devil's advocate a little bit, though, a good point that a voter ID does bring up that a lot of people might not necessarily understand is that when there's 0 cases of voter ID brought up, that's also because it's very hard to detect voter fraud. It's very hard to detect voter fraud. It's like, say you have the law that you have to be 21 to drink or buy alcohol, but you're not required to show or prove how old you are. There'd be no way of identifying that this person is doing something illegal. So a voter ID would probably arise counts of voter fraud, especially with absentee ballots and stuff like that. There's a lot of talks about elderly people who are deceased, but their names aren't legally declared dead. And so then that also leads to some possible cases of voter fraud, though I still am against it.
The Secretary of State's office, though, does have a whole big checks and balance system, so that when you go to register, if you register before Election Day, you have to, fill out some forms, and then they actually mail a card back to that address. And actually, one of my colleagues, his opponent, filled that form out wrong, which you also have to fill out when you file to run for office. And so he filled the form out wrong, and so the form came back to the Secretary of State's office, and so he was declared ineligible to run. And the same thing happens when you go to register for vote. There's a bunch of checks and balances, and they do check it against to make sure that you are not a felon. They do check to make sure that you're eligible to vote, that you're of age. And so they do this checks and balancing, and they mail you a card, and if that comes back to them, then they put a little flag next to it. So if you actually go to show up to vote, then they actually pull you aside and they ask you some more questions if you go to that poll. And then they have a bunch, again, if you go and register on the same day, they do ask some questions and they do follow up. And so they do attempt to minimize that fraud as much as possible. And then the county attorney's office does actively, if there is a voter fraud case and somebody turns it in, the county attorney's office does actively pursue those.
There absolutely is a lot of checks and balances. I'm going to be an election judge for Washington County, and there's so many procedures that you have to follow. Like you have to have 2 separate parties being in charge of counting ballots. You have to wrap the ballots in 25, and then you have to put a postmark on it and how many's in there, and there's so many procedures that you have to do. So I think there's adequate checks and balances to the process.
I think it's great that you're being an election judge. I've done that myself, and I think it's super educational, and you see who's coming to vote, and you see who's not coming to vote, young people, minorities and things. And the area that I represent has the lowest voter turnout in the city of Minneapolis, and when you look to the state of Minnesota, where we have the highest voter turnout in federal elections, so I can not proudly claim that I have probably the lowest voter turnout in the entire state. And as we're trying to do everything we can to get more people to vote, it's really frustrating to see these statewide efforts to keep people from voting.
Yeah, but I think part of the reason that the percentage of young people voting is so low is because the minimum voting age is just at such a bad time in your life. I mean, you're moving from your small town city from where you know everyone to some out-of-state college or something, and you're going to college, you're getting a new apartment, you're getting a job, and it's such a transitional time. It would be better if the voting age were lower so that you could start voting before you have to deal with all these stresses and stuff.
I think another part of the reason there's a lot of low youth turnout is because I think there's a lot of apathy towards the election process and a feeling of insignificance, as if my vote doesn't really matter. And I think a lot of it is youth also view the election at only a federal level, and they don't really take into consideration that their vote means a lot when it comes to the local politics and voting for people who have immediate impact on your current situation. If I think we were able to change the culture and make it more people more excited about the local elections, that would increase turnout, make people feel like they're important.
Yeah, I think there needs to be more education on voting too, because in like the civics classes, they just talk about the national and the presidential stuff. They don't, I was taking this one class in my middle school, and we did like a short unit, and on the election process, and we just talked about the presidential stuff and the electoral college and stuff. We didn't really talk about the local people. The people who matter most to us are the local people. They decide the local stuff, and that's the important stuff.
I agree. Actually, what also would, I believe, increase voter turnout is to lower the voting age, because that will create a significant number of a new constituency for local candidates to be able to you have to engage them to be able to get their vote. So I think that also would increase voter turnout of young people.
Yeah, part of the reason it's 23% also is because people don't try to engage the youth in the political process. I mean, all of the commercials on TV are aimed at the elderly. It's like they're trying to get these old people to vote, but they're not paying attention to us at all. It's like, hello, over here, voters over here.
I think that's a great point, and I'm the oldest person on my campaign committee, and I love that. It's a lot of really young people, and I think that that is a great way to engage in politics early. And Carrie had it in her family, which was great. But to engage in a campaign, a local campaign where you're working with a local candidate, knocking on your neighbors' doors, hearing what's important to them, I think establishing that early in your life would be a great way of increasing participation and turnout amongst young people.
Yeah. I think part of it also has to do with the issues that people talk about. A lot of issues that are important to youth aren't necessarily talked about on a meaningful level, but then you have someone that can really get the youth rallied up like Ron Paul, who then suddenly they talk about issues that young people care about, such as the war on drugs or like the education system or the TSA and all these things that no one else talks about, but then it gets youth excited because it's offering a new perspective about something they really care about and offers actual change, whereas you don't necessarily see that when you don't talk about things that don't affect them.
Yeah. The one thing that kind of makes me mad is sometimes there'll be like these political debates on TV where they're talking about education, but they never really get students involved. They're just like a bunch of old people who haven't gone to school in years talking about how they should raise the amount of homework. And it's already like, hello, over here, we've got like stacks of homework. It's like 7 hours a day. Like, listen to us.
I think a lot of the politicians focus too much on quantitative data rather than qualitative data, and that there's just because test scores don't really tell the whole picture, like the school environment is really important, and that if politicians could realize what students actually care about, what kids care about, that could also impact higher turnout.
In my experience in being a student, I realized that the engaging, interesting, not boring teachers are the ones with the kids not texting under the table, and the boring, monotone, overhead projector teacher is the one with everyone texting under the table. Like, if you're interesting enough, youth will listen, no matter how boring of a subject it is. You need to be engaging.
A good teacher is an engaging teacher on that side.
And when we live in the age of information, like, we don't necessarily need to have these facts drilled into our mind that we can write down on a piece of paper. I think we need to focus more on like critical thinking and like self-expression, because you can learn a lot about other people when they talk about themselves. You can learn about yourself when you talk about yourself. And you can't show that growth, that learning on a test score. Yeah,
we're in the age of the internet. We can just, if we need to know something, we can just pull out our cell phone and Google it. Yeah. There's no more, you can't just tell people, oh, you're too young to learn this. They'll just take out their cell phone and Google it. You need to be engaging, and if someone wants to know something, then you should be the one to teach it.
Mm-hmm.
I would encourage all of you, I know I've had many students from my area come and talk to me over at the Capitol or meet with me in Capitol or invite me to come to visit their school, and it has been interesting going into the classroom. And then I also represent the youth, so I've been over there actually door knocking in the dorms, which is a whole different experience, to just remind them to go vote and to why it's important to go vote. I mean, there are a lot of people that just kind of give you this glossy look of why do we want to vote? But I would encourage all of you to contact your senators and state reps and tell them why education and everything is important to you.
And I like that point about local government, and I don't think it's just a youth issue. I mean, I'm always meeting people that have no idea who their city council member is, who their county commissioner is, who their state representatives are. And I just love it when we get very young people, especially very young people, into City Hall. Just a few weeks ago, we had a resolution recognizing Latino Heritage Month in the city of Minneapolis, and we had dozens and dozens of young people in the school, elementary school age. I didn't step into City Hall till I was maybe close to 40. These kids are getting in there when they're 8 years old, so they have a long opportunity to engage in their municipal government.
All right, I don't mean to cut any further discussion off. Personally, I think this is interesting and fun to listen to, but we gotta get this, keep the ball rolling here with the next segment, which is about political campaigns. This may be a little more adult-oriented, but you know what? I'm sure the youth will provide excellent topics and points here. So a couple things such as while presidential campaign candidates, can't speak, focus on a handful of voters in swing states, many others are losing faith in our political system, actually. So has Citizens United decision and the cost of running political campaigns affected our ability to function as a democratic society? And how have expectations shifted with regards to the future of our political system? And finally, how can we make room for a greater diversity of voices and allow third-party candidates to share in the debate?
Well, firstly, you don't arrest people when they try to get into the debate. I heard that Jill Stein tried to get into the recent presidential debate and she got, well, arrested. So, yeah, firstly, we shouldn't arrest people who are trying to get into the debate. So, yeah.
I think, yeah, to get third-party candidates involved more, we need to do things like presidential candidate Gary Johnson of the Libertarian Party actually filed an antitrust lawsuit on the Commission of Presidential Debate, claiming to have monopoly over the election system, because currently they control who is able to be in the national presidential debates, and you need to have 15% of, or be polling at 15% in order to be acknowledged as a viable candidate, whereas someone like Gary Johnson, he's not going to be able to get that 15% unless he were in a presidential debate, but he's already on the ballot in all 50 states and would be capable of winning the election. So I think breaking up the monopoly that the Commission of Presidential Debates has will help a lot.
The system that we have now is just picking the lesser of two evils. I mean, there are a bunch of good third-party candidates, and the thing about third-party candidates is they listen, because they're not just trying to be like, hey, I'm celebrity. It's like they're real.
Well, and one way to address that sort of lesser of two evils concern, in the city of Minneapolis, we have ranked choice voting or instant runoff voting, so you get to rank your candidate. So you can pick your favorite as your first. A candidate needs to get 50% plus one to win, and so if you don't get that on the first ballot, you go to people's second ballot. If nobody gets it on the second ballot, you go to the third ballot. The bottom person kind of gets dropped as you go on until somebody gets 50% plus one. So it addresses that lesser of two evils question, but then from a political, from a candidate's perspective and a campaign perspective, you need to be speaking to your opponent's supporters as well. So it's to your benefit to absorb part of their platform, to know what's interesting to their, or what's important to their voters and their supporters. So it gives not only third-party candidates a greater opportunity to win, but also it makes you as a candidate and as a campaign more sensitive to what your opponents are saying. It's not sort of last person standing, one goes over the line, one doesn't, but you have to be talking to all of the electorate.
Yeah, the thing is that I've noticed about the presidential campaign is since it's just the lesser of two evils, they spend so much time on their commercials dissing each other. Like, they're just, it's just so much hate toward each other. And if there were actually third-party candidates, that wouldn't really happen because, sure, you're getting your other opponent out of the way, but there's a person standing right next to you who has actual thoughts.
I think the thing that's happened with this election is it's turned into not Obama versus Romney, but not Obama versus not Romney. And it's like when you have winner-take-all elections, it leads to a two-party system where then you can only have a Republican Party and a Democratic Party. But if we were to adopt, say, a European style of democracy with a proportional representation, we could more accurately represent everyone's beliefs. Because I know there was a poll conducted in 2011 that 14% of Americans identify with the Libertarian Party, yet zero seats in Congress are Libertarian seats. So if we had proportional representation, we could have 14 seats, and it would also shift the focus off the individual and more onto the ideology. And I think that would be make it not a popularity contest, but like actual serious political thought.
The city of Cambridge, Massachusetts has proportional representation in their city government, and I've had the good fortune to be there during a couple of election seasons and to sit in on campaign strategy sessions. And the conversation in their strategy sessions is so different than the conversation in a strategy session here. And they're talking about how do they reach out to candidate X's supporters or candidate Y's, or should we bring them into our coalition? It's much more about coalition building and trying to bring more candidates over the victory line instead of this last person standing mentality.
I would agree with that. It's mostly, it's about the people of the U.S. It's not about your party. It's not about anything else. It's about your constituency. It's about who you're elected to represent or running to represent. So I think a third-party candidate would be good. However, I do believe that there are good, like here in the state of Minnesota, the DFL party and the Republican side, there are good people in those parties that do represent their constituency. Like I met Senator Ann Rest of the Minnesota senator. She's very engaging in her constituency, and I see, like on Facebook and such, she's out in the community coalition building, like you were saying.
And in Minnesota, we're also very different because we have had, you know, in not too far recent history, we have had an independent governor. We have had viable third-party candidates run for governor and higher office, and in the city of Minneapolis.
We
and
have
so
Green
Yep.
on the city council. We've
Yep.
had 3 Green Party members on the city
Yep.
council since I've
And
been on it.
independent
And
parties.
Green Party had a state major party status
Yes.
briefly within the state of Minnesota.
yeah, Minnesota actually had 5 major parties at one point within the last, since 1998. There's actually been Green Party, Independent Party, DFL, Republican, and it might be Taxpayer Party of Minnesota.
And even the
They've dropped
DFL
off.
is a coalition party. Democratic and farmer labor parties joined together in the middle of the last century. And so I like that. I like that, you know, I'm a DFLer and not just a straight up Democrat.
I think with Citizens United, though, that's kind of really made the election process a lot uglier, even more so, because you have all these parties that you can't necessarily hold accountable talking about candidates, and they can say whatever they want, ridiculous things, and the other dude can just say, I'm not with them, and it suddenly gives a lot of like unnecessary bad attention, and just takes accountability out of politics.
And it's a lot of money where we don't know who it is. Like, so if somebody donates to me, I have to report it, and I have to report who they are, where in these PACs that are part of Citizens United, they can take money and they don't have to be reported, and they can take, we have a limit in the Minnesota, in the state Senate for my race, the limit's $500, for county commissioner it's $500, for city council it's
100 during an off year,
Yeah.
300 during an election.
I'm in an election year, so it's 500 right now. But we have to report that, and then like today, and then you have different cycles that you have to continually report it, where the PACs and the Citizens United, they don't have to. I mean, even if you have a PAC here, so like the Nurses Association has or the Firefighters Association, they have to report who they're giving money to and who they're collecting it to, where those, you know, enormous PACs, they do not have to do that. So it is kind of an unknown that's out there. So
It also makes it just unfair on the political field. Like you have our organizations that possibly donate millions and millions, or on the local level, to be able to create an unfair field of political opposition. It creates uneasiness with constituents.
Well, and I think we have yet to see what the risk is at the local level. I mean, I have to spend somewhere in the neighborhood of $40,000 to run a campaign every 4 years. During off years, I have to raise that in $100 increments, which is kind of a challenge to get to that amount. The idea that someone could swoop in with a $40,000 PAC contribution, anonymous PAC contribution, would completely upset the balance in a very local election like mine.
I think the elections have kind of gone to a plane of surrealness. I mean, these are people who are going to run our government. It's kind of become more of a celebrity type thing instead of, hey, this person is going to actually pass laws that might totally make your life terrible.
And another thing I don't think a lot of people talk about is the role that media plays in elections, and the fact that 6 companies own 90% of all media outlets in the United States. So that's 6 companies controlling all the information pretty much everybody hears. Companies like GE, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, CBS. That's where a lot of money, or the influence of money, comes into play, that nobody's talking about it because the people who would be talking about it are the people who don't want to talk about it. They're the companies. And I think that we need to figure out a way where we can overcome the role that these companies and the media has, and get other people talking about it.
Well, and I think you mentioned Facebook, so I think that'll be interesting going forward. More and more candidates are on Facebook, and they're on Twitter, and they're on social media, and so it will be interesting to see what role social media plays. And does that, I mean, I know it plays somewhat of a role, but is there a way to expand it, and especially as you guys grow up and you're so used to the internet. So I think that's, I mean, it's exciting too, because that's not, at least so far, not controlled by one of those 6 groups, and individual people can react instantaneously, so that is very exciting.
The importance of local elections. It emphasizes that, as Carrie knows, for us, it's called retail politics. It's being face-to-face with your voters. That's how we campaign. It's not so much a media blitz or something like that. I mean, we send mailers and things, but really it's literally meeting your voters. And again, in a ward that has very low voter turnout, I often say, I know all my voters. I mean, I probably have met maybe 80+% of the people that have actually voted for me. And so I think that's the importance of local politics.
Yeah. Barack Obama is my president, yet I've probably never been within a 6-mile radius of him. So, yeah.
And Facebook and social media, they can also, I think that can help young voter turnout, like we were talking about, because then suddenly your friends with Facebook, or your friends on Facebook are your peers, and then when you can get in discussions via social media, it can create conversation and create interest in local politics and have more people turn out. Yeah.